I stood in the doorway of our Pearl District apartment, suitcase still in hand, staring at my husband Derek as he casually sipped his morning coffee. The words he'd just spoken hung in the air like poison gas, suffocating me slowly. I have the right to date any woman I want and do anything I please. You're my wife, not my warden. If you don't like it, there's the door. 5 days later, he was the one begging at that same door, but by then, everything had changed. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning had started normally enough. I'd returned early from what was supposed to be a 3-day retreat in Cannon Beach with my college friends. The retreat had been cut short when torrential rains flooded the coastal roads, forcing us all to head home a day early. I'd texted Derek about the change in plans, but he hadn't responded. Not unusual lately, since he'd been consumed with preparations for the Pacific Northwest Tech Summit, a major conference where his company was scheduled to present their new software platform. I pushed open the apartment door quietly, not wanting to wake him if he was still sleeping. The living room was dark, curtains drawn against the early morning light. My rolling suitcase made a soft rumbling sound on the hardwood floor as I pulled it inside. That's when I heard voices coming from our bedroom. My first thought was that Derek had left the television on overnight, something he did occasionally when working late. But as I moved closer, I recognized the rhythmic quality of the sounds, the intimate laughter, the unmistakable indicators of two people who were definitely not watching television. My hand froze on the bedroom doorknob. Part of me wanted to turn around, walk back out, pretend I'd never come home early. But a stronger part, the part that had been ignoring warning signs for months, pushed the door open. Derek scrambled to cover himself and the woman beside him, a blonde I recognized from his office. Vanessa Price, the new marketing director he'd hired 3 months ago. The same woman he'd assured me was just a colleague when I'd mentioned how often her name came up in his conversations. The confrontation that followed was surreal in its casualness. Derek didn't apologize. He didn't beg for forgiveness or claim it was a mistake. Instead, he got out of bed with infuriating calmness, pulled on his pants, and walked past me into the kitchen. Vanessa gathered her clothes and slipped into the bathroom, closing the door softly as if she were a houseguest trying not to intrude on a private family matter. I followed Derek into the kitchen, my mind struggling to process what I'd just witnessed. He was making coffee, his movements methodical and unhurried. "We need to talk," I managed to say, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. "About what?" Derek replied, not turning around. The coffee maker gurgled and hissed, filling the silence between us. "About the fact that I just found you in bed with another woman," I said, louder this time, anger beginning to cut through the shock. Derek finally turned to face me, leaning against the counter with an expression of mild annoyance, as if I were interrupting something important. "Nicole, let's be adults about this. We've been together for 7 years. Marriage doesn't mean I stop being attracted to other people. It doesn't mean I give up my autonomy or my freedom." I stared at him, unable to believe what I was hearing. "Freedom? You're calling cheating on me freedom?" "I'm calling it honesty," he replied, pouring himself a cup of coffee. He didn't offer me one. Most men do this and lie about it. At least I'm being upfront with you now. I have the right to date any woman I want and do anything I please. You're my wife, not my warden. If you don't like it, there's the door. The casualness of his cruelty took my breath away. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a drunken mistake. This was a deliberate statement of how he viewed our marriage, how he viewed me. I was an arrangement, a convenience, not a partner he respected or valued. Vanessa emerged from the bathroom fully dressed, her hair pulled back into a neat ponytail. She walked past me without making eye contact, grabbed her purse from the coffee table, and headed for the door. Derek followed her, their murmured conversation too quiet for me to hear. I heard the front door open and close, then Derek returned to the kitchen. "Vanessa and I are going to Cabo this week," he announced, as if discussing a business trip. The tech summit got moved to virtual format because of some scheduling conflict, so we decided to take advantage of the free time. "I'll be back on Saturday." You're leaving, I repeated numbly. With her. While I'm standing here. Nicole, you're being dramatic. Derek checked his phone, scrolling through messages. This doesn't change anything between us. You still have your life, your freelance design work, this apartment. I'm not abandoning you. I'm just being honest about who I am and what I need. Something in his tone, the dismissive way he spoke, triggered a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I'd been making excuses for Derek's behavior for so long that I'd lost sight of my own worth. The late nights he claimed were work meetings. The credit card charges at expensive restaurants on nights he said he was eating takeout at the office. The way he'd gradually isolated me from friends and family, always with reasonable-sounding explanations about saving money or focusing on our future. I want to see our financial records, I said suddenly. All of them. Bank statements, credit cards, everything. Derek's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of something that might have been concern. Why? You've never cared about that stuff before. Because I'm starting to wonder what else you've been honest about, I replied. He shrugged, setting down his coffee mug. Fine. Password's the same as always. Look at whatever you want. You'll see that I've been providing for us just fine. He glanced at his watch. I need to pack. Flight leaves in 3 hours. I stood in the kitchen, listening to him move around the bedroom, opening drawers and closets. The coffee maker beeped, announcing the pot was ready, but I couldn't bring myself to pour a cup. Instead, I opened my laptop on the kitchen table and logged into our bank accounts. What I found there made my blood run cold. Our joint checking account, which had held nearly $15,000 2 weeks ago, now showed a balance of $800. The savings account we'd been building for a down payment on a house, money that had taken us 4 years to accumulate, was completely empty. Transferred out in 3 large chunks over the past month. I scrolled through the credit card statements, my hands beginning to shake. Charges at luxury hotels in Seattle, San Francisco, and Vancouver. Jewelry purchases at high-end boutiques. Romantic restaurants. All dated during times when Derek had told me he was traveling for business or working late at the office. The timeline painted a clear picture. This affair with Vanessa wasn't new. It had been going on for at least 3 months, possibly longer. And Derek had been systematically draining our accounts to fund it. I heard his footsteps approaching and quickly closed the laptop. Derek appeared in the doorway with a packed suitcase, dressed in expensive casual where I didn't remember him buying. I'll call you when I land, he said, as if this were a normal business trip. Try not to be upset about this, Nicole. It's actually healthier for our marriage if we're both honest about our needs. Before I could respond, he was gone. The apartment door clicked shut, leaving me alone in the suffocating silence. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at nothing, my mind racing through 7 years of memories and trying to identify the moment when everything had gone wrong. My phone buzzed with a text message. I expected it to be Derek, perhaps having second thoughts or at least offering some hollow reassurance. Instead, it was from a number I didn't recognize. This is Margaret Chen. Tom's mother. I know what Derek is doing and I know where he's hiding the money. We need to talk. Come to my house in Lake Oswego today if you can. Address below. Come alone. I stared at the message, confused and suspicious. Margaret Chen was the mother of Tom Chen, Derek's business partner and the tech startup they'd founded 3 years ago. I'd met her only twice, briefly, at company events. She was a quiet, elderly woman who kept to herself, rarely speaking unless spoken to. Why would she be contacting me? And how did she know about Derek's affair or our finances? My first instinct was to ignore the message. This had to be some kind of scam or mistake. But something about the direct, matter-of-fact tone made me reconsider. What did I have to lose at this point? My marriage was effectively over, my savings were gone, and Derek was on a flight to Mexico with his mistress. I typed back a response. I can be there by noon. The drive to Lake Oswego took 40 minutes through Portland's west side traffic. Margaret's address led me to an upscale neighborhood of large homes set back from tree-lined streets. Her house was a beautiful craftsman's style with a well-maintained garden and a view of the lake beyond. I parked in the circular driveway, next to a silver sedan that looked like it hadn't been driven in weeks based on the layer of pollen coating its surface. Margaret answered the door before I could knock, as if she'd been watching for my arrival. She looked older than I remembered, more frail, with paper-thin skin and trembling hands that gripped a wooden cane for support. But her eyes were sharp and alert, studying me with an intensity that made me feel exposed. "Nicole," she said simply. "Thank you for coming. Please, come inside." The interior of the house was elegantly furnished but showed signs of neglect. Dust on the surfaces, mail piled on the entry table, dishes visible in the kitchen sink. Margaret moved slowly through the hallway, her cane tapping against the hardwood floor. She led me to a sitting room with large windows overlooking the garden. 2 cups of tea were already prepared on the coffee table, steam rising from their surfaces. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Sit," Margaret instructed, lowering herself carefully into a wingback chair. I took the sofa across from her, accepting the cup of tea she gestured toward. "I know you're confused about why I asked you here," she continued. "And I know you're probably wondering if you can trust me. So let me start by being completely transparent with you." She reached for a folder on the side table and placed it between us. "I'm dying. Lung cancer, stage 4. The doctors give me 2 months, perhaps 3 if I'm unlucky. I've known for 6 weeks. My son Tom knows. Derek knows. They've been very concerned about my condition." Her thin lips curved into a smile that held no warmth. "Concerned about my will, that is. Not about me." I set down my teacup, unsure how to respond. Margaret continued before I could speak. "Tom and Derek's company isn't doing as well as they've led everyone to believe. In fact, it's hemorrhaging money. They've been covering operational costs by taking loans against anticipated contracts that keep falling through. 3 months ago, they came to me asking for a bridge loan. $200,000 to keep the company afloat until they could secure venture capital funding." She opened the folder and showed me bank statements and loan documents. I gave them the money. Not because I believed in their business plan, but because Tom is my only son and I wanted to help him. The agreement was that they would repay me within 6 months with interest, or give me an ownership stake in the company equivalent to my investment. Margaret pulled out more documents, these showing email exchanges and text messages. What I discovered, quite by accident, is that Derek has been siphoning money from the company account into personal accounts. Money that should have been used for business expenses or to repay me. Money he's been spending on his affair with Vanessa Price. She handed me a printout of bank transfers. The amounts and dates matched perfectly with the withdrawals I'd seen from our personal accounts. Derek hadn't just been stealing from me. He'd been stealing from his own company and from Margaret's loan. "Tom doesn't know the full extent of it yet," Margaret said. "He trusts Derek completely. They've been friends since college. But I've been watching the accounts carefully, and I've documented everything. Derek has taken nearly $90,000 over the past 3 months." I felt sick. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're married to a thief and a liar, and you deserve to know what he's really doing. And because I need your help to stop him before he destroys my son's future along with his own." Margaret leaned forward, her gaze intense. "Derek thinks I'm a frail old woman who doesn't understand business or technology. He thinks I'll die soon and the loan will be forgiven or forgotten. He has no idea that I've been keeping detailed records of every transaction, every conversation, every lie." She pulled out one more document, a medical record with official letterhead. "This cancer is going to kill me, Nicole. That's a certainty. But before I go, I'm going to make sure the people who've wronged me face consequences. Derek has stolen from me, lied to my son, and now I discover he's done the same to you. I'm proposing an alliance." I stared at this elderly woman, seeing her clearly for the first time. Behind the frail exterior was someone who had been systematically documenting wrongdoing while everyone underestimated her. What kind of alliance? I asked carefully. You help me gather additional evidence of Derek's theft and infidelity. I help you secure your financial future and expose him for what he really is. When I'm gone, my estate is supposed to go entirely to Tom. But I'm changing my will. Part of it will go to you, as compensation for what Derek has stolen. The rest will go to Tom, but only after Derek is removed from the company and prosecuted for embezzlement. The proposal was stunning in its calculation and its generosity. Why would you leave anything to me? You barely know me. Margaret's expression softened slightly. Because I was you once. 40 years ago, I had a husband who thought marriage gave him permission to do whatever he wanted. He spent money we didn't have on women whose names I never learned. By the time I left him, I had nothing. I rebuilt my life from nothing, and I swore that if I ever saw another woman in that position, I would help her if I could. She extended a trembling hand across the coffee table. So I'm asking you, Nicole. Will you help me make sure Derek pays for what he's done to both of us? I looked at her outstretched hand, thinking about Derek's casual cruelty that morning, about the empty bank accounts, about 7 years of my life given to someone who viewed me as an obstacle to his freedom rather than a partner. I thought about how he was probably sitting on a beach in Cabo right now, laughing with Vanessa while I sat here trying to figure out how to survive the wreckage he'd left behind. I reached out and shook Margaret's hand. Her grip was weak, but her eyes were steel. Yes, I said firmly. Let's make him pay. Margaret released my hand and settled back into her chair with visible relief, as though sealing our agreement had lifted a weight from her shoulders. She gestured toward the folder still sitting between us on the coffee table. First, you need to understand the complete picture of what Derek has been doing. Not just to you, but to everyone around him. Over the next hour, Margaret walked me through a timeline that was staggering in its scope. She had bank statements going back 8 months, showing a pattern of small withdrawals from the company account that gradually increased in size and frequency. At first, Derek had taken a few $100s here and there, always with plausible explanations attached in the company's accounting software. Equipment purchases, client entertainment, travel expenses for meetings that may or may not have actually happened. Tom never questioned any of it, Margaret explained, her voice tinged with sadness. He handles the technical side of the business, the product development and engineering. Derek manages everything else, sales, marketing, finances, client relationships. Tom trusted him completely because they'd been roommates in college, started the company together from Tom's apartment 5 years ago. Derek was the one who believed in Tom's software ideas when no one else did. She showed me copies of expense reports that Derek had submitted to the company accountant, a part-time bookkeeper who came in twice a month to process invoices and payroll. The reports were meticulous, detailed, convincing. Dinners with potential clients at upscale restaurants. Hotel stays for conferences in other cities. Software subscriptions and business tools. Everything looked legitimate on the surface. But I started getting suspicious about 3 months ago, Margaret continued, pulling out her own handwritten notes. Tom mentioned that Derek had landed a major contract with a Seattle-based firm, something that was going to bring in substantial revenue. He was so excited about it. But when I asked to see the contract, Derek said it was still being finalized by their legal team. Weeks went by, then months, and the revenue never materialized. When I pressed Tom about it, he said Derek assured him everything was moving forward, just delayed by corporate bureaucracy. Margaret's investigation had begun simply enough. She'd asked to review the company's financial statements, explaining that as their largest creditor, she wanted to monitor how her loan was being used. Derek had reluctantly provided summary reports, but Margaret had insisted on seeing the actual bank statements. That's when the discrepancies became obvious to someone who'd spent 30 years working as an auditor for a major accounting firm before retiring. Look at this, she said, pointing to a series of charges on a credit card statement. Derek submitted an expense report claiming these were business dinners with clients. But I cross-referenced the dates with Tom's calendar. Every single one of these dinners happened on evenings when Tom was out of town visiting his sister in Sacramento or attending tech conferences. Why would Derek be entertaining clients without his technical co-founder present? She pulled out more evidence, photographs printed from social media that she'd discovered through careful searching. Vanessa Price had been posting pictures from the same restaurants on the same dates, though she'd been careful not to tag Derek or mention who she was with. Margaret had matched the backgrounds, the table settings, even the cocktails visible in the photos. "This woman is smarter than she appears," Margaret said, studying one of Vanessa's Instagram posts. "She knows how to maintain plausible deniability. But she's also vain enough that she can't resist posting about the expensive lifestyle Derek is funding. Look at this bracelet she's wearing in this photo from 2 weeks ago." Margaret showed me another document, a credit card receipt from an upscale jewelry store in downtown Portland. The charge was for $3,200, submitted to the company as a client gift. But the description on the receipt clearly indicated it was a woman's tennis bracelet, and the photo of Vanessa showed her wearing what appeared to be the exact same piece. "I've documented 11 separate instances where Derek submitted false expense reports," Margaret said. "Jewelry, luxury hotel stays, expensive dinners, even a weekend trip to wine country that he claimed was a business retreat but was actually a romantic getaway. In total, he's stolen approximately $87,000 from the company over 6 months. The number made my stomach turn. Combined with what he'd taken from our personal accounts, Derek had embezzled well over $100,000 to fund his affair. "Does Tom know any of this?" I asked. Margaret shook her head slowly. "I've been trying to figure out how to tell him without destroying him. Tom idolizes Derek. He credits him with giving him the confidence to start the company, with believing in his technical abilities when Tom doubted himself. Learning that his best friend and business partner has been stealing from him, lying to him, betraying him this completely, it's going to devastate him." She reached for a tissue, dabbing at her eyes. "And I won't be here to help him pick up the pieces. This cancer is aggressive. I have weeks, not months, regardless of what the doctors say to make me feel better. I can feel it in my body, the way it's shutting down system by system." I felt a surge of sympathy for this woman who was facing death while trying to protect her son from a truth that would shatter him. "What do you need from me?" I asked. Margaret straightened in her chair, her expression becoming focused and determined. "I need you to help me document Derek's personal life in a way that I can't. You have access to your shared apartment, his personal belongings, his computer. I need evidence of the affair that's concrete and indisputable. Text messages, emails, photos, anything that proves this isn't just a one-time mistake but a calculated, long-term deception." She pulled out a small leather notebook and a pen, handing them to me. "Keep detailed notes of everything you find, with dates and times. Take photographs of documents, but also make copies. We need redundancy because Derek will try to destroy evidence once he realizes what's happening." Over the next 30 minutes, Margaret outlined a methodical approach to gathering evidence. She explained how to access phone records, how to search computer files for hidden folders, how to examine credit card statements for patterns of behavior. Her experience as an auditor had taught her how to find financial irregularities, and she was teaching me to apply those same principles to personal betrayal. "Tonight, while Derek is in Cabo, you need to search the apartment thoroughly," Margaret instructed. "Look for paperwork he might have hidden, second phones, anything unusual. Men like Derek often keep trophies of their affairs, either out of arrogance or sentimentality. Look in places you wouldn't normally check, the back of closets, inside luggage, taped to the underside of drawers." She handed me a small recording device that looked like an ordinary USB drive. "This is a digital voice recorder. If Derek calls you from his trip, record the conversations. Let him talk, don't confront him directly yet. Men like him often reveal more than they intend when they think they're in control of the situation." Margaret also gave me contact information for her attorney, Patricia Lawson, a sharp woman in her early 50s who specialized in business litigation and fraud cases. Patricia knows about my situation and about Derek's theft from the company. She's been helping me prepare documentation for when we're ready to take action. She's also going to help you file for divorce and secure your financial interests. The word divorce hung in the air between us. Until that moment, I hadn't fully processed that my marriage was ending. I'd been so focused on the immediate shock and betrayal that I hadn't thought about the legal and practical implications. Margaret seemed to sense my hesitation. "I know this is overwhelming," she said gently. "This morning you thought you had a marriage, flawed perhaps, but salvageable. Now you're sitting in a stranger's house being told your husband is a thief and a liar, and you're being asked to become a detective in your own life. It's a lot to process." "It's not that," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. "I think I've known for a long time that something was wrong. I just kept telling myself I was being paranoid or insecure. Derek was very good at making me question my own perceptions, at explaining away things that didn't add up. But deep down, I knew. I just didn't want to face it." Margaret nodded with understanding. "Gaslighting. That's what they call it now. Making you doubt your own reality. My ex-husband was a master at it. He could look me in the eye and tell me the lipstick on his collar was from his secretary accidentally brushing against him, and make it sound so reasonable that I felt guilty for questioning it. We spent another hour going over practical matters. Margaret gave me a spare key to her house and told me I was welcome to come here whenever I needed a safe space away from my apartment. She also gave me access to a secured online folder where she'd been storing all her documentation about Derek's embezzlement, so I could review it in detail and understand the full scope of his crimes. Before I left, Margaret walked me to her study, a small room lined with bookshelves and dominated by a large oak desk. She unlocked a drawer and removed a sealed envelope. "This is my new will," she explained. "Patricia helped me draft it last week. The previous version left everything to Tom, which seemed natural since he's my only child. But I've made some modifications." She didn't open the envelope, but she explained its contents. The bulk of her estate, including the house and her investment portfolio worth approximately $1.8 million, would still go to Tom. But there were conditions attached. Tom would receive his inheritance only after Derek was formally removed from the company and legal action was taken for the embezzlement. If Tom refused to press charges or tried to protect Derek, the estate would instead be divided between several charities Margaret had selected. "And there's a provision for you," Margaret added. $200,000, the same amount I loaned to the company. "It's my way of compensating you for what Derek stole from your marriage, and for helping me ensure justice is served. The money will be placed in a trust that Derek cannot access or make claims against, protected even if you're still technically married when I pass." I started to protest that I couldn't accept such a generous gift from someone I barely knew, but Margaret held up her hand. "This isn't charity, Nicole. This is payment for services rendered. You're going to help me document a case of embezzlement and fraud that could send Derek to prison. You're risking his wrath, possibly his retaliation, to do what's right. That deserves compensation. And frankly, I have no one else to leave it to. I'd rather it go to someone who's been wronged than to distant cousins I haven't spoken to in 20 years. I drove back to my apartment in a daze, my mind struggling to process everything I'd learned. By the time I pulled into the parking garage, it was late afternoon. The building seemed different somehow, as if the revelation of Derek's betrayal had changed the very architecture of my life. I took the elevator to our fourth-floor unit, my hands shaking slightly as I unlocked the door. The apartment felt hostile now, filled with memories that had been recontextualized by this morning's discovery. The couch where we used to watch movies together was where he'd probably sat with Vanessa. The kitchen where I'd made countless dinners was where he'd announced his trip to Cabo with such casual cruelty. Even our bedroom, which I couldn't bring myself to enter, had become a crime scene of infidelity. I started in Derek's home office, a small second bedroom he'd converted into a workspace. His desktop computer was password protected, but I knew the password. He'd never bothered to hide it from me because he'd never thought I'd have reason to look. The arrogance of that assumption fueled my determination as I logged in and began searching through his files. The first folder I found was labeled Client Presentations, innocuous enough. But buried 3 folders deep was a subfolder called Archive that contained hundreds of photos. Photos of Derek and Vanessa at restaurants, at hotels, on weekend trips I hadn't known about. They weren't attempting to hide their relationship in these images. They looked like any couple in love, smiling, touching, comfortable with each other in a way that spoke of intimacy and time spent together. The timestamps on the photos went back 7 months, long before Derek had officially hired Vanessa as the marketing director. They'd clearly known each other before she joined the company. I downloaded the entire folder onto a USB drive, my hands mechanical as I worked through the nausea rising in my throat. Derek's email revealed even more. He'd been careless about deleting messages, probably because he never imagined I'd look. There were hundreds of exchanges between him and Vanessa, some professional but most personal and intimate. They discussed their future together, making plans for after Derek left me. Vanessa wrote about apartments she was looking at that would be perfect for them. Derek responded with promises about the money he'd be able to provide once the company secured its next round of funding. One email chain made my blood run cold. Vanessa had written asking Derek if he felt guilty about lying to me. His response was chilling in its casualness. Nicole is comfortable and secure. I'm providing for her financially, giving her a nice place to live, supporting her freelance work. What more does she want? If she can't handle me having a life outside our marriage, that's her issue to work through, not mine. I'm not doing anything wrong by being honest about my needs. I printed the most damaging emails, watching the pages emerge from Derek's printer with a strange sense of detachment. This was evidence now, documentation of betrayal that would be used in court proceedings and legal filings. The personal pain of reading his words about me, about us, had to be set aside in favor of building an airtight case. In the bedroom closet, I found exactly what Margaret had predicted. Inside a shoebox on the top shelf, hidden behind winter clothes, was a second cell phone. An older iPhone with a cracked screen but clearly still functional. When I powered it on, I discovered it wasn't password protected. The phone contained nothing but communications with Vanessa, a dedicated device for their affair that kept everything separate from his primary phone. The messages were explicit, detailed, damning. They discussed their sexual encounters in graphic terms. They made cruel jokes about me, about Tom, about Margaret. Derek had sent Vanessa screenshots of text messages from me, mocking my concerns about our relationship. She'd responded with laughing emojis and dismissive comments about how I needed to get a life. I photographed every message, methodically scrolling through months of communications. The cruelty of it was almost worse than the infidelity itself. These weren't just two people having an affair. They were actively contemptuous of everyone they were deceiving, treating it like a game they were winning. By the time I finished searching the apartment, it was nearly midnight. I'd filled 2 USB drives with evidence, photographed dozens of documents, and recorded a detailed inventory of everything I'd found. My notebook contained pages of observations, dates, patterns of behavior. I felt like a forensic investigator at a crime scene, which in a sense, I was. My phone rang, Derek's name appearing on the screen. I remembered Margaret's advice about recording conversations and quickly activated the recording app before answering. "Hello," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Hey babe," Derek's voice was relaxed, slightly slurred from what was probably several drinks. I could hear music and laughter in the background, the ambient sounds of a beach resort. "Just wanted to check in, let you know we landed safely. Weather here is perfect." "That's good," I replied, gripping the phone tightly to keep my hand from shaking. "You sound weird," Derek observed. "Are you still upset about this morning?" "Because we really need to have an adult conversation about realistic expectations in modern marriage. Monogamy is an outdated concept, Nicole. Most successful people understand that." I bit back the angry response that wanted to escape and instead asked calmly, "How long have you been planning this trip with Vanessa?" "A few weeks," Derek said casually. "It just worked out perfectly when the summit got moved to virtual. Why waste a week sitting at home when we could be enjoying the beach? You should think about taking a trip yourself, do something fun. Maybe you'd be less uptight if you got out more." The gaslighting was so blatant now that I could recognize it clearly. He was reframing his affair as my problem, my inadequacy, my failure to be sophisticated enough to understand his needs. "Did you use our savings for this trip?" I asked. There was a pause, and I could almost hear Derek recalculating his approach. I used our money for a vacation, yes. Couples take vacations all the time, Nicole. The fact that you're not here is your choice, not mine. You could have been more flexible. Flexible about you bringing your girlfriend? I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. There you go again, being dramatic. Derek's tone shifted to annoyance. I'm not going to keep defending myself to you. I've been honest about what I need in my life. If you can't handle that, then maybe we need to discuss whether this marriage is working for either of us. Maybe we do, I said quietly. Another pause. What's that supposed to mean? It means I think you're right. We need to have an honest conversation about our marriage. When you get back, we should sit down and discuss everything openly. No more pretending. Derek seemed thrown by my agreement. Okay, he said slowly. Yeah, that's good. That's mature of you. We'll talk when I get back on Saturday. Just try to relax this week, okay? Don't overthink everything. After he hung up, I played back the recording, listening to his casual cruelty with a detachment I hadn't felt during the actual conversation. This would be useful, evidence of his admission to using our money for the trip, his dismissive attitude toward our marriage, his gaslighting techniques. I texted Margaret to let her know I'd completed the search and found substantial evidence. She responded immediately despite the late hour. Well done. Come by tomorrow morning. There's more you need to know about the company finances and Tom's situation. Bring everything you found. We need to organize it properly. That night, I slept on the couch, unable to face the bedroom. I dreamed of evidence folders and bank statements, of Margaret's gentle but steely voice guiding me through the documentation of betrayal. When I woke the next morning, I felt different. The shock and pain were still there, but underneath was something harder, more determined. Derek had made a critical mistake. He'd assumed I was too weak, too dependent, too naive to fight back. He'd underestimated me the same way he'd underestimated Margaret. And now we were going to make sure he understood exactly how wrong he'd been. The morning sunlight felt harsh as I drove back to Lake Oswego, the USB drives and printed documents safely stored in my messenger bag. I'd barely slept, my mind replaying Derek's phone call and the mountain of evidence I'd uncovered. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those photos of him and Vanessa, their casual intimacy a stark contrast to the distant politeness that had characterized my own marriage for the past year. Margaret was waiting for me in her sitting room, but she wasn't alone. A woman in her early 50s sat beside her, dressed in a crisp navy suit with reading glasses perched on her nose. She stood as I entered, extending her hand with a firm grip that conveyed both professionalism and warmth. Nicole, this is Patricia Lawson, Margaret introduced. My attorney and the person who's going to help us turn your evidence into legal action. Patricia gestured for me to sit and immediately got down to business. Margaret has briefed me on your situation. I've reviewed the financial documentation she's compiled regarding Derek's embezzlement from the company. What I need from you now is everything you discovered last night. We're going to build 2 parallel cases, one for the company theft, and one for your divorce proceedings. I spent the next 2 hours walking Patricia and Margaret through every piece of evidence I'd gathered. Patricia took meticulous notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions about dates, amounts, and specific statements Derek had made. When I played the recorded phone call from the previous night, Patricia's expression hardened. That's textbook financial abuse and gaslighting, she said, pausing the recording at several points to highlight specific phrases. He's admitting to using marital assets without your consent, then attempting to make you feel unreasonable for objecting. In Oregon, that's going to work strongly in your favor during divorce proceedings. Margaret had been quiet during most of my presentation, but now she spoke up. Show her the emails about the Seattle contract. The ones where Derek discusses it with Vanessa. I pulled up the relevant messages on my laptop. In them, Derek had written to Vanessa explaining that the Seattle contract he'd told Tom and Margaret about didn't actually exist. He'd fabricated it entirely to explain where money was going and to keep them confident about the company's prospects. Vanessa had responded with concern, asking if Tom would find out. Derek's reply was chilling. Tom trusts me completely. He's brilliant with code but clueless about business. As long as I keep telling him things are progressing, he'll believe me. By the time he figures out there's a problem, we'll be long gone. Patricia sat back in her chair, processing the implications. This isn't just embezzlement. This is conspiracy to defraud. Derek has been systematically deceiving his business partner while stealing from the company and planning to abandon it entirely. She looked at Margaret with sympathy. I'm sorry, but Tom needs to know about this immediately. Every day Derek remains in control of company finances, he can do more damage. Margaret's hands trembled as she gripped her cane. I know. I've been putting it off because I didn't want Tom to have to deal with this while also processing my diagnosis. But you're right. We can't wait any longer. Where is Tom now? I asked. At the office, Margaret replied. He's been working around the clock trying to fix a critical bug in their software before a client presentation next week. A presentation Derek scheduled, ironically, with a client who probably doesn't exist. Patricia began organizing the documents into separate folders, creating a clear narrative structure. Here's what we're going to do. Margaret, you need to call Tom and ask him to come here this evening. Tell him it's important but don't give details over the phone. Nicole, you're going to be here when we tell him everything. He needs to see that this isn't just his mother's suspicions, but documented reality confirmed by multiple sources. She turned to me with a serious expression. I want to be very clear about what's going to happen next. When Tom learns about this, he's going to be devastated. His best friend has betrayed him, his company is in jeopardy, and his mother is dying. He may react with anger, denial, or both. You need to be prepared for that. What about Derek? I asked. He's in Cabo until Saturday. Do we tell Tom before Derek gets back? Absolutely, Patricia said firmly. We need to move quickly to protect the company's remaining assets and to secure evidence before Derek has a chance to destroy it. Tomorrow morning, I'm filing an emergency motion to freeze all company accounts and to remove Derek's access to financial systems. I'm also filing your divorce petition with a request for temporary restraining orders preventing Derek from accessing your joint accounts or disposing of marital property. The speed of it all made my head spin. Less than 48 hours ago, I'd thought I had a marriage, flawed but stable. Now I was planning legal maneuvers with an attorney I'd just met, preparing to blow up my husband's business partnership and career. Margaret must have seen the uncertainty on my face. Nicole, I need you to understand something. Derek has been planning to abandon both you and Tom for months. Those emails make that crystal clear. He's been systematically stealing money, creating a cushion for himself and Vanessa, and setting up Tom to take the fall when the company collapses. If we don't act now, Tom could end up personally liable for business debts Derek created, and you could be left with nothing but Derek's financial wreckage. She was right, and I knew it. Derek hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. He'd been strategically positioning himself to escape the consequences of his actions while leaving destruction in his wake. What do you need me to do? I asked Patricia. First, we need to secure your personal assets. Do you have any accounts that are solely in your name? I shook my head. Everything is joint. Derek insisted on it when we got married. He said it showed trust and commitment. Patricia made a note. Classic control tactic. We're going to open a new account in your name only today. I want you to document every asset you brought into the marriage, everything you've contributed financially, and we're going to calculate what you're entitled to. Given Derek's theft of marital funds, you have grounds to claim a significantly larger share of any remaining assets. Over the next hour, Patricia helped me create a comprehensive financial profile. My freelance graphic design business had been bringing in steady income for years, money that had gone into our joint account and which Derek had been freely spending. I'd sold my car when we moved in together because Derek said we only needed one vehicle, using the proceeds as a down payment on his luxury sedan. I'd even taken out a personal loan 2 years ago to help cover the company's payroll during a cash flow crisis, money that had never been repaid. You've been subsidizing Derek's lifestyle and his business for years, Patricia observed, reviewing my documentation. Between your direct financial contributions and the marital funds he's stolen, you're looking at a substantial claim. And given his affair and his theft, Oregon law allows us to argue for a disproportionate division of assets in your favor. Margaret added, plus the $200,000 from my estate, which will be protected from any claims Derek might make. You're going to be financially secure, Nicole. More secure than you've been since you married him. That afternoon, Patricia drove me to a bank where we opened a new checking account solely in my name. She advised me to have my freelance clients redirect payments to this new account immediately. We also drafted formal letters to Derek's company informing them of the impending legal action and requesting preservation of all financial records. By the time we returned to Margaret's house, it was early evening. Tom had responded to his mother's message and was on his way over, confused but compliant. Margaret looked exhausted, her skin gray and her breathing labored. The day's activities had taken a visible toll on her declining health. "Are you sure you're up for this tonight?" I asked, concerned. "I have to be," Margaret replied simply. "I won't have many more opportunities." Tom arrived at 6:30, still wearing his work clothes and carrying a laptop bag. He was a tall, thin man in his mid-30s with kind eyes and an easy smile that faded when he saw the serious expressions waiting for him. "Mom, what's going on? You sounded worried on the phone." Margaret gestured for him to sit. "Tom, there's something you need to know about Derek and the company. It's going to be difficult to hear, but it's important that you listen carefully to everything before you react." Over the next hour, we walked Tom through everything. Margaret started with her suspicions about the missing Seattle contract and her decision to review the company finances more carefully. Patricia presented the evidence of embezzlement, showing Tom the pattern of fraudulent expense reports and diverted funds. I contributed the personal evidence, the affair, the stolen savings, Derek's own words in emails describing how easy it was to deceive Tom. Tom's face cycled through a range of emotions as he processed the information. Initial confusion gave way to denial. "There has to be an explanation. Derek wouldn't do this. We've been friends for 15 years. We started this company together on faith and determination." "I know," Margaret said gently. "And that's exactly why he was able to get away with it for so long. He exploited your trust, your friendship, your generous nature." Tom stood abruptly, pacing to the window and staring out at the darkening garden. "The Seattle contract. I've been waiting months for that revenue to come through. We've been making business decisions based on that pending income. I've been turning down other opportunities because Derek said we needed to focus on delivering for this major client." He turned back to face us, anger finally breaking through his shock. "There is no client. There never was. Which means every decision we've made for the past 6 months has been based on a lie." Patricia stepped in with her calm professional voice. "Tom, I need you to focus on what we can control right now. Tomorrow morning, I'm filing motions to freeze the company accounts and remove Derek's access to financial systems. You're going to need to change all passwords and access codes tonight. We need to secure what's left before Derek realizes what's happening." "How much is left?" Tom asked, his voice hollow. Margaret answered. "Based on the most recent statements, approximately $43,000 in the operating account. That's all that remains of my $200,000 loan plus whatever the company had earned in legitimate revenue. Derek has stolen or spent the rest." Tom sank back into his chair, his head in his hands. "We have payroll due in 2 weeks. We have server costs, office rent, contractor payments. $43,000 won't cover half of it. The company may not survive this," Patricia said bluntly. "I'm sorry, but you need to prepare for that possibility. However, if we act quickly, we can at least prevent Derek from taking what little remains, and we can pursue criminal charges that might result in restitution." "Criminal charges," Tom repeated numbly. "Against my best friend. My business partner. The guy who was my roommate when we were broke college students eating ramen for every meal." "Against the man who betrayed you," Margaret corrected gently. "Tom, I know this hurts. But Derek made his choices. He chose to steal from you, to lie to you, to put his affair and his selfish desires above the partnership you built together. You didn't cause this. You're the victim here. Tom looked at me for the first time since the revelations began. And he did the same thing to you. Worse, even. You're his wife. Was his wife, I said quietly. Patricia is filing divorce papers tomorrow. How are you so calm about this? Tom asked, genuine confusion in his voice. You just found out your husband has been cheating on you, stealing from you, planning to leave you. You should be falling apart. I considered the question. How was I so calm? 24 hours ago, I would have been exactly as Tom described, devastated, confused, unable to function. But something had shifted when I shook Margaret's hand and agreed to this alliance. I'd found a purpose in the destruction, a path forward through documentation and legal action. I think I'm angry, I said finally. Furious, actually. But I'm channeling it into something productive. Derek thought I was weak, that I'd accept whatever scraps of respect he threw my way. He was wrong. Tom nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. He thought the same about me. That I was too naive, too trusting, too focused on the technical work to notice what he was doing. He looked at his mother. And he definitely underestimated you, didn't he? Margaret smiled faintly. Dying old women are easy to dismiss. People see the cane and the gray hair and they assume there's nothing dangerous left inside. Derek made that mistake. Patricia began gathering her documents. Tom, I need you to make a decision tonight. Are you willing to press charges against Derek for embezzlement? Are you willing to remove him from the company and take whatever legal action is necessary to recover the stolen funds? Tom was quiet for a long moment, staring at the evidence spread across the coffee table. Finally, he nodded. Yes. I built this company on honest work and innovative ideas. If it's going to fail, it won't be because I let someone steal it from the inside. He looked at me. I'm sorry you got caught up in this. Derek's my friend, my responsibility. I should have noticed something was wrong. He fooled all of us, I replied. That's what people like Derek do. They're expert manipulators. Before Tom left, Patricia had him sign several documents authorizing her to act on behalf of the company in the emergency motions she was filing. She also had him change all the company passwords and access codes immediately, using his laptop right there in Margaret's sitting room. Within an hour, Derek was effectively locked out of every company system, though he didn't know it yet. After Tom left, Margaret looked drained. Help me to my bedroom, she asked me. I need to rest. I supported her as she made her way slowly down the hallway. Her bedroom was comfortable but showed the same signs of neglect as the rest of the house. Medication bottles covered the nightstand, and a hospital-grade oxygen concentrator sat in the corner, though Margaret refused to use it regularly. You did well today, Margaret said as I helped her settle into bed. Tom needed to see that you were strong, that this wasn't just emotional hysteria but calculated response to real crimes. You gave him permission to be angry instead of just sad. I learned from you, I said, adjusting her pillows. Margaret caught my hand, her grip weak but earnest. Nicole, I need you to promise me something. When I'm gone, and this is all over, don't let what Derek did make you bitter. Don't let it stop you from trusting people or building a new life. Some people are users and liars, but most aren't. You deserve better than what he gave you, and you'll find it. Tears stung my eyes. I promise. And take care of Tom if you can. He's going to need a friend when this is over. His business might fail, his best friend turned out to be a criminal, and his mother won't be there to help him rebuild. He's a good person who got hurt by someone else's selfishness. Just like you. I stayed with Margaret until she fell asleep, then quietly let myself out. The drive back to my apartment was strange. I'd spent 2 full days in Margaret's house, in her world of documentation and strategy, and returning to the space I'd shared with Derek felt like visiting a museum of my former life. I spent the evening organizing all the evidence into clearly labeled folders, both physical and digital. Patricia had stressed the importance of redundancy, so I uploaded everything to secure cloud storage and made multiple backup copies on different drives. By midnight, I had a complete archive of Derek's betrayal, financial records, photographs, emails, text messages, recorded phone calls, witness statements. The next morning, I woke to a text from Patricia sent at 6 a.m. Motions filed. Court hearing scheduled for Monday morning. Derek's account's frozen as of 8 a.m. today. He'll find out soon. Be prepared. I imagined Derek in Cabo, probably lounging by a pool with Vanessa, trying to use a credit card and having it declined. The company accounts he thought he controlled would show access denied. His carefully constructed world was about to collapse, and he didn't even know it yet. My phone rang at 9:15. Derek's name flashed on the screen. I let it ring through to voicemail, then listened to his message. His voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "Nicole, what the hell is going on? My cards aren't working and I can't access the company accounts. Call me back immediately." I didn't call back. Instead, I texted, "Speak to Patricia Lawson. She's my attorney. All communication should go through her from now on." I included Patricia's office number. 3 minutes later, Derek called again. Again, I didn't answer. He left another voicemail, this one louder and more aggressive. "This is ridiculous. You can't just freeze me out of my own company and my own money. I'm getting on the next flight home and we're going to sort this out face to face." Patricia had warned me this would happen, that Derek would try to intimidate and manipulate once he realized he'd lost control. She'd advised me not to be alone in the apartment when he returned. I called Margaret to let her know Derek was coming back early. "Good," Margaret said, her voice stronger than it had been the previous evening. "Let him come. Let him show up angry and demanding. Patricia has already arranged for a process server to deliver the divorce papers and restraining order as soon as he lands. And Tom is meeting with an employment attorney this afternoon to discuss formally terminating Derek's position with the company." "What if he tries to access the apartment?" I asked. "It's in both our names on the lease. The restraining order prohibits him from coming within 100 feet of you. If he violates it, he'll be arrested." Patricia made sure the building management received a copy of the order this morning. Security has instructions not to let him up. I spent the day packing my essential belongings, not knowing how long I'd need to stay away from the apartment. Margaret had already offered me her guest room for as long as I needed it. As I folded clothes and gathered toiletries, I felt a strange sense of liberation. I was leaving behind more than just an apartment. I was leaving behind the version of myself who had accepted Derek's treatment, who had made excuses for his behavior, who had diminished her own needs to accommodate his demands. By evening, I was settled in Margaret's guest room with my suitcases and my evidence files. Tom came by after his meeting with the attorney, looking worn but determined. "Derek's been calling me non-stop," he said. I haven't answered. "My lawyer says I shouldn't have any direct contact with him until after the criminal investigation begins." "Criminal investigation," Margaret repeated with satisfaction. Music to my ears. Tom managed a weak smile. "The attorney says we have an excellent case for embezzlement and fraud. He's already contacted the district attorney's office. They're very interested, especially given the amount involved and the documented evidence." We ordered dinner from a local restaurant and ate together in Margaret's dining room, 3 people brought together by betrayal but finding unexpected comfort in shared purpose. Tom told stories about the early days of the company, about his and Derek's friendship in college, trying to reconcile the person he'd known with the criminal those memories had become. "I keep thinking about all the times he covered for me," Tom said. "When I was too anxious to do sales presentations, Derek would handle them. When I doubted our business model, Derek talked me through it. Were all those moments lies too? Was he manipulating me even then?" "Probably not," Margaret said gently. "People are complicated, Tom. Derek likely was a good friend to you in the beginning. But somewhere along the way, he changed. Or maybe he just revealed who he really was underneath. Either way, the person who helped you start this company and the person who stole from it are both Derek. You have to make peace with that contradiction. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. I opened it cautiously and immediately wished I hadn't. It was a long, rambling text from Derek, sent from what must have been a different phone since I'd blocked his primary number. The message cycled between anger and pleading, between threats and promises to change, between blaming me for overreacting and admitting he'd made mistakes. I showed it to Patricia via text, and she responded immediately, "Do not reply. Forward it to me. This is evidence of harassment and will support the restraining order." Derek's world was crumbling, and he was desperate. Tomorrow, he would land in Portland to find himself locked out of his company, his accounts frozen, divorce papers filed, and criminal charges pending. The life he'd been building with Vanessa, funded by stolen money and sustained by lies, was disintegrating. And somewhere in Cabo, Vanessa was probably realizing that her wealthy boyfriend wasn't quite as wealthy as he'd claimed, and that being the other woman in an embezzlement case wasn't as glamorous as fancy dinners and expensive jewelry. Margaret retired early, exhausted by the day's events. Tom left shortly after, promising to update us after Derek's return. I sat alone in the guest room, surrounded by evidence of my husband's betrayal, and felt something I hadn't expected. Hope. Not for my marriage, which was clearly over. But hope for what came next. Hope that justice would be served, that Derek would face consequences for his actions, that I would rebuild my life into something stronger and more authentic than what I'd had before. Derek had tried to break me with his casual cruelty and his calculated theft. Instead, he'd freed me from a prison I hadn't even realized I was in. And tomorrow, when he landed in Portland expecting to bully and manipulate his way back into control, he was going to discover just how badly he'd miscalculated. Margaret's words echoed in my mind. People like Derek see relationships as transactions and others as obstacles or resources. He'd seen me as a resource to be managed and eventually discarded. He'd seen Tom as a useful fool to be exploited. He'd seen Margaret as a dying old woman whose money could be stolen without consequence. All of us had been underestimated. And now, Derek was about to learn the cost of that arrogance. Derek's flight landed at Portland International Airport at 11:30 Saturday morning. I knew the exact time because Patricia had arranged for a process server to meet him at baggage claim. From Margaret's guest room, I tracked the unfolding events through a series of text updates from Patricia's paralegal who was coordinating the service of papers. 11:47 a.m., subject spotted at Carousel 3. Female companion present, matches description of Vanessa Price. 11:52 a.m., papers served. Subject became verbally aggressive. Airport security intervened. Female companion left the scene rapidly, wheeling her own luggage toward ground transportation. I couldn't help but feel a grim satisfaction imagining that moment. Derek expecting to collect his luggage and head home, probably still confident he could talk his way out of whatever trouble he'd sensed brewing from abroad. Instead, being handed divorce papers and a restraining order in a crowded airport while Vanessa abandoned him at the first sign of real consequences. Patricia called me directly at noon. "It's done. Derek has been formally served with divorce papers, temporary restraining orders, and a notice of emergency hearing regarding marital asset protection. He's also been informed that criminal complaints have been filed with the district attorney's office regarding the company embezzlement." How did he react? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. According to the process server, he went through several stages very quickly. Shock, then anger, then attempted negotiation. He tried to get the server to tell him where you were staying. Obviously, that information wasn't provided. He's also been formally notified that he's terminated from the company effective immediately and that his access to all company resources has been revoked. I heard papers rustling on Patricia's end. Tom is at the office right now with a locksmith, changing all the physical locks. Derek's company laptop, phone, and access cards were already disabled remotely yesterday. If he tries to enter the building, security has instructions to refuse him entry and contact police if he persists. Margaret appeared in the doorway of the guest room, moving slowly with her cane. Despite her obvious physical weakness, her eyes were bright with alert interest. "Is that Patricia? What's happening?" I put the phone on speaker so Margaret could hear. Patricia continued, the emergency hearing is scheduled for Monday morning at 9. The judge will review our motion to maintain the account freezes and to award Nicole temporary exclusive use of the marital apartment. Given Derek's theft of marital funds and the restraining order, I'm confident will prevail. What about criminal charges? Margaret asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. The district attorney's office has assigned an investigator. They want to interview both Tom and Nicole next week. With the documentation we provided, they believe they have probable cause for arrest warrants on multiple counts of embezzlement, fraud, and theft. However, they want to build an airtight case before moving forward with formal charges. After Patricia hung up, Margaret and I sat in the living room, the weight of what we'd set in motion settling over us. Outside, Portland's typical spring drizzle had started, rain streaking the windows and blurring the view of the lake beyond. How do you feel? Margaret asked me. I considered the question carefully. Numb, mostly. And relieved. And terrified about what comes next. All of those things at once. That's normal, Margaret assured me. You've just blown up your entire life. Even when it's the right thing to do, even when that life was built on lies and betrayal, it's still frightening to watch it collapse. My phone began buzzing with calls from Derek's number, one after another. I'd blocked him, but he was trying from different phones now, probably borrowed from strangers at the airport or purchased quickly from a convenience store. Each call went straight to voicemail. I didn't listen to the messages. Tom arrived around 2 in the afternoon, looking exhausted but purposeful. He'd spent the morning at the office, securing the premises and meeting with their remaining employees to explain that Derek was no longer with the company. Most of them weren't surprised, Tom said, accepting the coffee Margaret offered him. Apparently Derek's behavior had been concerning people for months. Late arrivals, long lunches, distracted during important meetings. Our lead developer told me she'd almost quit last month because Derek had been so dismissive of her work. He sat heavily on the sofa, running his hands through his hair. I was so buried in the technical side that I missed all the warning signs. Everyone else could see something was wrong, but I just kept trusting him because he was my friend. He exploited that trust deliberately, Margaret said. Tom, you need to stop blaming yourself. Derek is responsible for Derek's choices. Tom pulled out his laptop. I've been going through the company finances all morning with our accountant. It's worse than we thought. Derek didn't just steal the money you loaned us, Mom. He'd been taking out business loans using company assets as collateral, loans I never knew about. We're in debt to the tune of $340,000. The number hung in the air like a bomb. Margaret's face went pale. $340,000? How is that possible? He forged my signature on loan documents, Tom explained, his voice hollow. The accountant found the paperwork. Derek set up meetings with lenders when he knew I'd be traveling or focused on project deadlines. He presented himself as the managing partner with authority to sign for the company. The loans were short-term, high-interest, the kind desperate businesses take when they're about to fold. Where did all that money go? I asked. Tom turned his laptop screen toward us, showing a spreadsheet he'd compiled. Luxury purchases, travel, rent on an apartment I didn't know he was keeping, and get this, he'd been making payments to Vanessa. Regular transfers of $3,000 to $5,000, listed in the books as consulting fees. She wasn't just his mistress. She was on his payroll, being paid with stolen and borrowed money. Margaret closed her eyes briefly, processing the magnitude of Derek's deception. Can the company survive this? No, Tom said bluntly. We have $43,000 in assets and over $300,000 in debts. Even if we liquidated everything, sold all our equipment and intellectual property, we couldn't cover half of it. The company is effectively bankrupt. He looked at his mother with deep sadness. I'm sorry, Mom. Your $200,000 is gone. There's no way to recover it. I knew that was likely, Margaret said quietly. I made peace with it when I decided to expose Derek. The money doesn't matter anymore. Justice matters. Making sure he faces consequences matters. Tom nodded, but I could see the weight of failure pressing down on him. This had been his dream, his creation, the culmination of years of work and innovation. Derek hadn't just stolen money. He'd destroyed Tom's professional future. What will you do? I asked Tom gently. File for bankruptcy, most likely. Shut down the company in an orderly fashion, try to pay our employees what we owe them. Our accountant thinks we can structure it so that I'm not personally liable for the fraudulent loans Derek took out, but it's going to be complicated. And expensive. I'll need to hire a bankruptcy attorney on top of the criminal attorney I already have. The afternoon dragged on with difficult conversations about legal strategies and financial realities. Patricia called twice more with updates. Derek had checked into a budget hotel near the airport, his credit cards apparently maxed out or frozen. He'd attempted to withdraw cash from ATMs but found all accounts locked. He'd even tried to enter the company office building but was turned away by security. Around 5, Margaret's phone rang. We all tensed when she looked at the caller ID. It's Derek, she said. Don't answer, Tom advised immediately. But Margaret shook her head. I want to hear what he has to say. I want to hear how he tries to justify himself. She answered on speakerphone, her voice cool and controlled. Derek. Margaret, thank God. Derek's voice was strained, frantic. I don't know what's happening. Some kind of terrible misunderstanding. I've been served with divorce papers, kicked out of my own company, all my accounts are frozen. I need your help to sort this out. No misunderstanding, Margaret replied calmly. You've been caught, Derek. Caught stealing from the company, caught defrauding Tom, caught cheating on your wife. There's no talking your way out of this. A pause, then Derek's tone shifted to something harder. You can't prove anything. Business expenses, that's all it was. And what happens between Nicole and me is personal, none of your business. We can prove everything, Margaret said. We have bank statements, expense reports, emails, text messages, photographs. We have your own words describing how easy it was to deceive Tom. We have documentation of fraudulent loans you took out using forged signatures. The district attorney is very interested in all of it. You're a bitter old woman who never liked me, Derek shot back, his mask slipping entirely. You've been poisoning Tom against me from the beginning. And you've manipulated Nicole into thinking she's some kind of victim when she's just a boring, ungrateful wife who couldn't accept that I needed more than what she offered. Tom leaned forward, his fists clenched, but Margaret held up a hand stopping him from speaking. Derek, I'm dying. In a matter of weeks, I'll be gone. But you're going to spend years, possibly decades, dealing with the consequences of what you've done. That gives me more satisfaction than you'll ever understand. I'll fight this, Derek threatened. I'll hire lawyers, I'll sue all of you for defamation and harassment. You can't destroy my life and get away with it. With what money? Margaret asked simply. Your accounts are frozen, your credit cards are maxed out, and no reputable attorney is going to take your case once they see the evidence against you. You're finished, Derek. You finished yourself the moment you decided that other people existed solely to serve your needs. She ended the call before he could respond. The room was silent except for the sound of rain against the windows. Tom looked at his mother with newfound respect. That was ice cold, Mom. That was honest, Margaret corrected. Derek has spent years being coddled and enabled, convinced of his own charm and cleverness. Someone needed to tell him the truth without any sugar-coating. That evening, the three of us prepared dinner together in Margaret's kitchen, a strangely domestic scene given the chaos swirling around us. Tom chopped vegetables with methodical precision while I worked on a salad. Margaret supervised from a chair at the kitchen table, too weak to stand for long but determined to be part of the activity. You know what I regret most? Tom said suddenly, pausing mid-chop. All the time I wasted. 5 years building a company with someone who was undermining it from the inside. 5 years trusting someone who was laughing at me behind my back. I could have spent that time working with someone honest, building something real. You built something real, I countered. The software you created, the technical innovations, those were yours. Derek didn't contribute to that. He just took credit and collected revenue. The work itself was legitimate and valuable. Nicole's right, Margaret added. Derek was a parasite, not a partner. He attached himself to your talent and rode it as far as he could. But the talent was always yours. Tom managed a weak smile. Maybe. The bankruptcy attorney thinks I might be able to sell some of our proprietary code to another company. Won't be much, but it's something. We ate dinner in the dining room, rain drumming steadily on the roof. Halfway through the meal, Margaret set down her fork and looked at both of us with sudden intensity. I need to tell you something. My doctor called this morning while you were both out. The cancer is progressing faster than anticipated. They're estimating I have 2 weeks left, maybe less. Tom's fork clattered to his plate. 2 weeks? But you said you had months. I did have months when I was first diagnosed, Margaret explained gently. But things have accelerated. The pain is worse, my breathing is becoming difficult, and I'm sleeping 16 hours a day. My body is shutting down. Tears streamed down Tom's face. I can't lose you. Not now, not with everything else falling apart. Margaret reached across the table and took his hand. Tom, listen to me. I've lived 73 years. I've had a good life, a successful career, and the joy of raising you. I'm not afraid of dying. What I am afraid of is leaving you alone to deal with Derek's mess. That's why we had to move quickly, why we couldn't wait. I needed to see this through before I ran out of time. She turned to me. Nicole, I need you to promise me you'll look after Tom when I'm gone. Not romantically, I'm not matchmaking from beyond the grave. But as a friend. He's going to need someone who understands what Derek did, who witnessed this whole situation. Promise me you'll be there for him. I promise, I said, my own voice thick with emotion. And Tom, Margaret continued, I need you to promise me you won't let what Derek did make you cynical. Don't stop trusting people or believing in partnerships. Yes, you were betrayed, but that's Derek's failing, not yours. Promise me you'll try again, rebuild, find new partners who deserve your trust. I promise, Mom, Tom whispered. We spent the rest of the evening together, sharing stories and memories, pretending for a few hours that we weren't counting down Margaret's remaining days or waiting for Monday's court hearing that would determine so much about our futures. Around 10, Margaret retired to bed, exhausted by the emotional day. Tom and I cleaned up the kitchen in comfortable silence. Thank you for being here, Tom said as he dried the last dish. I know you have your own crisis to deal with. You didn't have to take on my mother's crusade too. It stopped being just her crusade when I found out what Derek did, I replied. We're all victims of the same person. It makes sense to face him together. Tom nodded thoughtfully. You're different from how Derek described you. He always made you sound kind of passive, dependent on him for everything. But you're not that at all. I let him make me feel that way, I admitted. I let him convince me that I was lucky to have him, that I should be grateful for whatever attention and support he chose to give me. It's amazing how someone can reshape your self-perception when you love them. I understand that completely, Tom said. Derek convinced me I was the technical genius but hopeless at business, that I needed him to handle the real-world stuff. He made me feel like the company would collapse without his sales skills and business savvy. Turns out the company was collapsing because of him, not in spite of him. We moved to the living room, both too wired to sleep despite the late hour. Through the windows, Portland's city lights reflected off the low clouds, creating an amber glow against the darkness. What are you going to do after all this is over? Tom asked me. I don't know, I said honestly. Find an apartment, rebuild my freelance business, file taxes as a single person. All the mundane logistics of dismantling a marriage and starting over. What about you? Same, essentially. File bankruptcy, look for a job, figure out what comes next. I'm 36 years old and I'm going to be starting from scratch like I just graduated college. At least we're starting over with clear vision, I offered. We know what red flags to watch for now. We know what real partnership looks like and what exploitation disguised as partnership looks like. Tom smiled sadly. That's a depressing kind of wisdom, but you're right. We're older and poorer but significantly wiser. My phone buzzed with another blocked call attempt from Derek. The frequency had increased as the evening progressed, suggesting he was becoming more desperate. He's not going to stop, is he? I said. Not until he's forced to, Tom replied. Derek's entire worldview is built on the idea that he can talk his way out of anything, that charm and confidence will overcome any obstacle. He literally cannot comprehend a situation where those tactics don't work. Sunday passed in a strange suspended animation. Margaret slept most of the day, her body conserving what little energy remained. Tom worked on his laptop, communicating with his bankruptcy attorney and organizing company documents. I spent hours reviewing my own financial records with Patricia via phone, preparing for Monday's hearing. Around dinner time, Patricia called with news. Derek has retained an attorney. Someone from a small firm that handles mostly DUI cases and minor criminal matters. Not exactly the caliber of representation he'd need for what he's facing, but apparently it's all he could afford. His lawyer has already sent over a response to our divorce filing. What does it say? I asked, bracing myself. Mostly denials and counter-accusations. Claims you're exaggerating the financial misconduct, that the money spent was for legitimate marital purposes, that you're trying to punish him for being honest about his needs. Standard stuff. The judge will see right through it, especially given our documentation. Oh, and Derek's lawyer is requesting a postponement of tomorrow's hearing, claiming insufficient time to prepare. Will the judge grant it? Unlikely. This is an emergency hearing about asset protection, not the main divorce trial. The threshold is whether there's sufficient evidence that Derek misused marital funds to justify continuing the account freezes. We've provided that evidence in detail. His attorney will have to work with what they have. That evening, Tom received a phone call from one of the company's clients, a small tech firm that had been using their software. The client had heard rumors about the company's troubles and wanted to know if their service would be disrupted. Tom spent an hour reassuring them and being honest about the situation, ultimately offering to personally support their implementation even if the company dissolved. After he hung up, Tom looked defeated. That's 6 calls today from worried clients. The tech community is small. Word travels fast. By Monday, everyone in the Portland tech scene will know that my company imploded due to embezzlement. My professional reputation is going to be destroyed. Your reputation will be as a talented engineer who was betrayed by a criminal partner, Margaret said from the doorway, having woken from her nap. Tom, you didn't do anything wrong. People who matter will understand that. But people who don't know the full story will just see a failed startup and assume we were both incompetent, Tom argued. Then you tell the story, I suggested. Not now, not while everything is raw and legal proceedings are ongoing. But eventually, you can be open about what happened. Transparency is powerful. Other entrepreneurs need to hear about the warning signs of bad partnerships, the red flags you missed, the lessons you learned. Your experience could help someone else avoid the same fate. Tom considered this. Maybe. Right now it feels like the worst thing that's ever happened to me, but you're right, there might be value in sharing it eventually. We all went to bed early Sunday night, knowing that Monday would be intense and emotionally draining. I lay in Margaret's guest bed, listening to the house settle around me, and thought about how completely my life had transformed in less than a week. 7 days ago, I'd thought I was in a stable marriage with predictable problems. Now I was living in a dying woman's house, allied with my husband's betrayed business partner, preparing for court hearings and criminal investigations. The old Nicole would have been paralyzed by fear, would have crumbled under the weight of so much uncertainty and conflict. But something had fundamentally shifted inside me. I discovered I was stronger than I'd known, more capable than I'd believed. Derek had tried to diminish me for years, but his betrayal had paradoxically liberated me from his influence. Around midnight, I heard movement in the house. I found Tom in the kitchen, making tea in the dark. Couldn't sleep either, he asked. Too much on my mind. We sat together at the kitchen table, drinking tea and not talking, finding comfort in shared insomnia. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the night clear and cold. Through the window, stars were visible beyond the city's light pollution. Whatever happens tomorrow, Tom said finally, I'm glad we're facing it together. Derek tried to isolate both of us, keep us separated so we couldn't compare notes or support each other. He wanted us weak and alone. Instead, his betrayal brought us together and made us stronger. There's irony in that. He underestimated everyone around him, I agreed. Your mother, you, me. He thought we'd all just accept his version of reality because he was so confident in presenting it. Tom raised his teacup in a mock toast to being underestimated. I clinked my cup against his. To proving him wrong. Monday morning arrived gray and cold, typical Pacific Northwest spring weather. We dressed carefully for court, understanding the importance of presentation. Tom wore a dark suit, looking every bit the professional entrepreneur despite his company's collapse. I chose a conservative navy dress and minimal jewelry, wanting to appear serious and credible. Margaret insisted on coming despite her obvious weakness. I didn't come this far to miss the show, she said, gripping her cane as Tom helped her to his car. Besides, the judge needs to see me, needs to understand that this isn't just abstract financial crimes but theft from a dying woman. That matters. The courthouse was an imposing concrete building downtown. We met Patricia in the lobby, and she walked us through what to expect. The hearing would be brief, probably less than an hour. The judge would review the evidence for maintaining frozen accounts and granting temporary orders about the apartment. Derek would have an opportunity to respond through his attorney, but given the strength of our documentation, Patricia was confident we'd prevail. We took seats in the courtroom gallery. A few minutes later, Derek entered with his attorney, a harried-looking man in an ill-fitting suit who kept glancing nervously at the stack of evidence binders Patricia had prepared. Derek looked terrible. His expensive casual clothes from the Cabo trip were rumpled, his hair unwashed, his face drawn and exhausted. When he spotted us sitting together, his expression cycled through shock, anger, and something that might have been fear. His eyes locked on mine across the courtroom, and I saw him mouth something. It might have been, please, or it might have been an insult. I looked away, refusing to engage. Beside me, Margaret sat straight-backed and alert despite her obvious physical weakness, and Tom stared forward stoically. The bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Sandra Morrison entered. She was a woman in her early 60s with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes that suggested she had little patience for nonsense. Patricia stood and presented our motion with clear, concise professionalism, walking the judge through Derek's theft of marital funds, the embezzlement from the company, and the urgent need to protect remaining assets. Derek's attorney attempted to object, to claim more time was needed, to suggest our evidence was exaggerated. Judge Morrison silenced him with a raised hand. Counsel, I've reviewed the submitted documentation. Unless you have evidence that contradicts the bank statements, expense reports, and electronic communications already provided, I suggest you save your objections for the full trial. She spent 15 minutes reviewing the evidence binders, occasionally asking Patricia clarifying questions. Then she looked directly at Derek. Mr. Harper, I'm continuing the freeze on all accounts pending full adjudication. I'm also granting Mrs. Harper exclusive use of the marital apartment and extending the restraining order. You're prohibited from contact with your wife except through attorneys, and you're prohibited from approaching any assets of the business in question. Do you understand? Derek stood, his face flushed. Your Honor, this is all a misunderstanding. I can explain everything if you'll just listen. I've listened to your attorney's response brief, Judge Morrison replied coolly. It provides no credible alternative explanation for the documented evidence. Court adjourned. Next hearing date will be scheduled by the clerk. She stood and exited, leaving Derek standing stunned in the center of the courtroom. His attorney gathered papers quickly, whispering urgently to Derek who seemed unable to process what had just happened. As we filed out, Derek tried to approach me, but bailiff stepped between us, pointing to the restraining order. Outside the courthouse, Patricia allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. That went as well as we could have hoped. Judge Morrison is no nonsense, and she clearly saw through Derek's defense immediately. The frozen accounts will remain locked, and you have legal control of the apartment. You can go home, Nicole. Home. The word felt strange. That apartment had been home, but it would never feel the same now. Still, it was mine for the moment, a space to reclaim and make my own. Tom was supporting Margaret, who had made it through the hearing but was visibly depleted by the effort. "Let's get you back to the house," he said gently. Margaret passed away 9 days after the courthouse hearing, on a Wednesday morning just as the sun broke through Portland's perpetual cloud cover. Tom called me at 7:15, his voice thick with grief but steady. "She went peacefully. In her sleep, just like she wanted. The hospice nurse is here. Can you come?" I drove to Lake Oswego through morning traffic, my vision blurred with tears. Despite knowing this moment was inevitable, despite Margaret's own acceptance of her death, the finality of it struck me hard. This woman who had been a stranger 2 weeks ago had become my ally, my friend, my example of how to face injustice with dignity and strategic precision. Tom met me at the door, his eyes red but his composure maintained through sheer force of will. "She left letters for both of us. Patricia brought them yesterday afternoon. Mom wanted us to read them after she was gone." Inside, the house felt different without Margaret's presence, as if her fierce spirit had been the only thing animating the space. The hospice nurse was in the bedroom making arrangements with the funeral home. Tom and I sat in the living room where just over a week ago Margaret had first revealed Derek's crimes and proposed our alliance. Tom handed me a cream-colored envelope with my name written in Margaret's shaky handwriting. Inside was a single page, her final words to me composed during one of her last lucid moments. "Dear Nicole, if you're reading this, I've finished my part of our plan. I hope I lived long enough to see Derek lose his power over you and Tom. I hope you're standing stronger than when we first met. You came to me as a woman whose husband had just shattered her world, but I saw immediately that you had steel underneath the shock. You just needed permission to use it. Take care of Tom for me. He's going to grieve hard and doubt himself even harder. Remind him that Derek's betrayal wasn't his fault. Remind him that trust isn't weakness and that the world needs people like him who lead with faith in others rather than suspicion. The money I'm leaving you isn't charity. You earned it by helping me achieve something I couldn't do alone, ensuring a bad man faces consequences for his actions. Use it to build a life that Derek could never diminish. Use it to become whoever you want to be, without anyone's permission. I wish I could have known you longer. You would have made a wonderful daughter. Margaret." I folded the letter carefully, tears streaming down my face. Tom was reading his own letter, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. We sat together in our grief, two people brought together by betrayal and bound together by the woman who had seen us both clearly and loved us enough to fight for us with her dying strength. The funeral was held that Saturday at a small chapel overlooking the Willamette River. Despite Margaret's insistence that she wanted a simple service, over 100 people attended. Former colleagues from her accounting career, neighbors from Lake Oswego, members of charitable organizations she'd supported quietly for decades. Tom gave a eulogy that captured his mother's fierce intelligence and her unexpected tenderness, her ability to see through pretense while still believing in human goodness. Derek did not attend. His attorney had advised against it, and besides, he was drowning in legal troubles of his own. 2 days after the courthouse hearing, the district attorney had filed formal charges, 3 counts of embezzlement, 2 counts of fraud, 1 count of forgery for the loan documents he'd signed using Tom's name. His bail was set at $50,000, money he didn't have. He remained in county jail awaiting trial. Vanessa had disappeared entirely. Her social media accounts went dark the day Derek was arrested. Rumor through the Portland tech community suggested she'd moved back to California, possibly to avoid being called as a witness or charged as an accomplice. The apartment Derek had been renting for their tryst sat empty, the landlord complaining about unpaid rent and abandoned furniture. Patricia handled the reading of Margaret's will with the same professional efficiency she'd brought to all aspects of our case. Tom inherited the house, Margaret's investment portfolio, and her personal effects. The portfolio was worth slightly more than expected, nearly $2 million carefully invested over decades of disciplined saving. The provision about pressing charges against Derek had been satisfied, so Tom received his inheritance without conditions. My portion, the $200,000 Margaret had promised, was transferred into a trust account that Patricia had established weeks earlier. The trust documents were ironclad, protected from any claims Derek might attempt to make on the grounds that it was compensation for services rendered in documenting criminal activity, not marital property subject to division. Your ex-husband's attorney did try to challenge it, Patricia informed me during our meeting in her office. Argued that any money you received during the marriage should be considered shared assets. The judge rejected that argument in about 30 seconds. Derek stole from you, Nicole. This money is restitution, not income. With Margaret's gift and the divorce settlement Patricia had negotiated, I found myself in unexpected financial security. The divorce was finalized 8 weeks after filing, expedited due to Derek's criminal conviction, which made everything straightforward. Derek contested nothing, had nothing to contest with. Our joint accounts were empty except for the $800 that had been there when I first discovered his betrayal. The apartment lease was transferred entirely to my name. Derek's only assets were debts and criminal judgments against him. The court ordered Derek to pay restitution of $173,000, representing the marital funds he'd stolen and half of the fraudulent business loans he'd taken. Of course, he had no way to pay it. His conviction meant professional ruin in the tech industry. His theft meant no one would hire him for any position of trust. He would likely spend the next decade working minimum wage jobs while garnishments took a percentage of every paycheck, never quite making a dent in what he owed. Tom's company officially dissolved 3 months after Derek's arrest. The bankruptcy proceedings were complicated but ultimately successful in separating Tom's personal liability from Derek's fraudulent actions. Tom was able to sell some of the company's proprietary code to a larger firm for $60,000. Enough to pay the employees their final wages and settle legitimate business debts. The fraudulent loans Derek had taken were designated as his personal responsibility in the criminal restitution order. I moved out of the Pearl District apartment into a smaller but brighter place in the Hawthorne neighborhood, a second-floor unit with large windows and a view of Mount Hood on clear days. The space was entirely mine, decorated to my taste, filled with furniture I chose without consulting anyone. I hung artwork from local artists on the walls and set up a proper home office for my freelance design work. My client base had actually grown during the turmoil. The tech community's gossip about Derek's crimes had included mention of his wife, the graphic designer he'd been systematically undermining. Several people reached out offering projects, having heard my story and wanting to support my independence. Within 2 months, I had more work than I could handle and was turning down projects that didn't interest me. Tom found work at an established tech company, a senior engineering position that paid well and valued his expertise. He sold Margaret's house, unable to bear living in the space where she'd spent her final weeks, and bought a modern condo downtown. We stayed in touch regularly, meeting for coffee or dinner every few weeks, our friendship solidified by shared trauma and mutual respect. 6 months after Margaret's death, Tom called me with unexpected news. I'd been approached by a venture capital firm. They want to fund a new startup, and they want me to be the technical founder. But Nicole, I'm terrified. What if I choose the wrong business partner again? What if I miss the warning signs? What if I build something and someone destroys it from the inside? We met at a coffee shop in the Alberta Arts District, sitting outside despite the October chill. Tom looked tired but healthier than he'd been during the worst of the crisis. Tell me about this opportunity, I said. He explained the venture capital firm's interest in his work, the potential partners they'd suggested, the market opportunity they saw. As he talked, I could see his excitement breaking through his fear. This was what he loved, building things, solving technical problems, creating tools that made people's lives easier. You're afraid because you learned that trust can be weaponized against you, I said when he finished. But Tom, the lesson isn't to stop trusting. It's to trust wisely. Do background checks on potential partners. Require transparency in financial dealings. Build in oversight mechanisms. You can protect yourself without becoming cynical. But what if I'm still not careful enough? Tom asked. What if my judgment is fundamentally flawed? Your judgment about Derek was flawed because he was your friend first and your business partner second. You wanted to believe in him because of your history together. That's not going to be the case with new partners. You'll go into it with clear eyes and healthy boundaries. Tom stirred his coffee slowly, considering. Mom would tell me to try again, wouldn't she? She'd say that letting Derek steal my future along with my past would be the real tragedy. She would absolutely say that, I agreed. And she'd be right. 3 weeks later, Tom signed with the venture capital firm. His new partners were experienced entrepreneurs with track records and references Tom verified thoroughly. The company structure included financial oversight and regular auditing, systems that would have caught Derek's theft within weeks. Tom was building again, but this time with wisdom earned through painful experience. As for Derek, I heard about him occasionally through the inevitable small world connections of Portland's tech scene. After serving 14 months in county jail, he was released on parole. Last I heard, he was working at a call center, living in a studio apartment in Gresham, his wages garnished to pay the restitution he'd never be able to fully satisfy. Vanessa never returned to Portland, and according to someone who'd known her, she was engaged to someone else entirely, Derek already forgotten. I should have felt more satisfaction in his downfall. Instead, I mostly felt nothing. Derek had become irrelevant to my life, a cautionary tale rather than an ongoing presence. The man who'd once had the power to make me question my own worth was now just someone I used to know, someone whose choices had led predictably to consequences. One evening in late November, almost a year after that Thanksgiving morning when Derek had stood in our kitchen and told me he had the right to do anything he pleased, I sat in my new apartment organizing old photos. I came across pictures from our wedding, images of two people who looked genuinely happy. Had Derek loved me then? Had there been a moment when our relationship was real before it became a transaction? I would never know the answer, and I realized I didn't need to know. Whether Derek had ever loved me was his truth, not mine. My truth was that I'd survived his betrayal, that I'd found strength I didn't know I possessed, that I'd built a life better than anything I'd had before. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Tom, calling from his new office. Hey, I know it's last minute, but my team is having a small dinner thing tomorrow night. Would you want to come? I'd like you to meet my new partners, and I think you'd actually enjoy some of the people we've hired. I'd love to, I said, meaning it. Great. Oh, and Nicole? Thank you. For everything. For helping my mom, for standing with me when everything fell apart, for being the friend I needed when I didn't know I needed one. Right back at you, I replied. After we hung up, I returned to the photos, but instead of dwelling on what had been lost, I thought about what had been gained. Margaret's fierce determination and her final gift of both money and wisdom. Tom's friendship, born from shared pain but sustained by genuine affection. My own rediscovered strength and independence. Derek had tried to break me with his casual cruelty, his calculated theft, his absolute certainty that he had the right to do whatever served his interests regardless of who it hurt. Instead, he'd freed me from a life lived small, from a marriage where I'd made myself less to accommodate someone who never deserved the sacrifice. I gathered the old photos and put them in a box, not destroyed but archived, part of my history but not my present. Then I opened my laptop and began working on a new design project, one that challenged my skills and excited my creativity. The apartment was quiet except for the sound of my fingers on the keyboard and the distant hum of the city beyond my windows. This was my life now. Built by my own hands, funded by my own work, supplemented by a dying woman's gift, occupied by friendships formed through fire and tested by crisis. It wasn't the life I'd planned when I married Derek 7 years ago, full of romantic notions about partnership and shared futures. It was better. It was mine. The next evening, I arrived at the restaurant where Tom's team had gathered. He introduced me to his new business partners, both women in their 40s with impressive backgrounds and warm smiles. His employees were a mix of young engineers and experienced developers, all excited about the project they were building together. The conversation flowed easily, ranging from technical challenges to Portland's restaurant scene to the best hiking trails in the Columbia River Gorge. One of Tom's partners, a woman named Allison, ended up sitting next to me during dinner. Tom told me a bit about what happened with his last company, she said quietly. That must have been incredibly difficult for both of you. It was, I acknowledged. But it also taught us both what we're capable of handling. Sometimes the worst experiences show you your own strength. Allison nodded thoughtfully. I had a similar situation early in my career. Business partner who was cooking the books, taking money, lying to clients. It nearly destroyed me professionally. But I rebuilt, and I built better because I knew what warning signs to watch for. We talked for over an hour, sharing stories of betrayal and rebuilding, of lessons learned and wisdom earned. By the end of the evening, I had her business card and a tentative coffee date scheduled for the following week. Not every connection made through pain leads somewhere positive, but sometimes the people who understand your scars are the ones who help you heal. Walking to my car after dinner, I passed a couple arguing on the sidewalk. The man's voice had that particular tone I recognized too well, dismissive and condescending, making the woman defend herself for having feelings about his behavior. The woman looked young, maybe mid-20s, and the expression on her face was painfully familiar, hurt and confusion mixed with the terrible suspicion that maybe she was being unreasonable, maybe she was overreacting, maybe she should just accept his version of reality. I almost kept walking. It wasn't my business, and interfering in strangers' relationships rarely ended well. But I thought about Margaret, who'd reached out to me because she'd once been in my position and wished someone had helped her. I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, making excuses for Derek's behavior and questioning my own perceptions. I approached the couple carefully. "Excuse me," I said to the woman. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but are you okay? Do you need help?" The man immediately became defensive. "We're fine. This is a private conversation." I ignored him, keeping my attention on the woman. "I've been where you are. If you need someone to talk to, or just need to get away from this situation, I'm happy to help. No judgment, no pressure." The woman looked at me with tears in her eyes. "I'm fine," she said automatically, but her voice wavered. I pulled out my phone and quickly typed my number into a new contact. "I'm sending you my information. If you need anything, call me. Anytime." I sent the contact to her phone, which buzzed in her hand. The man grabbed the woman's arm. "Let's go. We don't need help from random people." He pulled her away, and I watched them disappear down the street, hoping she'd remember my offer when she needed it. Maybe she'd never call. Maybe she'd delete my number and stay with that man and convince herself everything was fine. Or maybe, somewhere down the road, she'd remember that a stranger had seen her distress and offered help without conditions. Maybe that would be the thing she remembered when she finally found the strength to leave. I couldn't save everyone. I couldn't undo Derek's betrayal or bring Margaret back or erase Tom's painful lessons. But I could be present for the people around me. I could extend the same hand that Margaret had extended to me, offering alliance and support to those who needed it. Driving home through Portland's wet streets, I thought about the journey from that morning when Derek had casually announced his affair while making coffee to this moment, nearly a year later, when I was financially secure, professionally thriving, and surrounded by genuine friendships. The path between those 2 points had been painful and terrifying and exhausting. It had also been necessary. Derek had been wrong about so many things, but his greatest miscalculation was believing he had the right to do whatever he wanted without consequences. He'd thought marriage gave him permission, that charm would excuse betrayal, that the people he'd hurt were too weak or too trusting to fight back. He'd learned, too late, that rights come with responsibilities and that actions have consequences, even for those who believe themselves above such concerns. I parked in front of my apartment building and sat in the car for a moment, looking up at the lit windows of my second-floor unit. Tomorrow I had client meetings and coffee with Allison and a yoga class I'd started attending. Next week, Tom and I were planning to visit Margaret's grave together, to tell her about his new company and my growing business and all the ways we were honoring her memory by living fully and honestly. Life after Derek wasn't perfect. I still had moments of anger about the years I'd wasted, still occasionally wondered if I'd missed warning signs that should have been obvious, still felt the sting of his casual cruelty when I let myself remember his exact words and tone. But those moments were becoming less frequent, less powerful, less defining. What defined me now was what I'd built from the wreckage: a career I loved, friendships based on mutual respect, financial security I'd earned through my own work and Margaret's incredible generosity, and most importantly, an unshakable understanding of my own worth. Derek's opinion of me, his assessment of my value, his judgment of my reactions, none of that mattered anymore because I'd discovered my own truth underneath his distortions. I got out of the car and headed inside, climbing the stairs to my apartment where my laptop waited with half-finished design projects and my phone held messages from clients and friends. This was my life now, built deliberately and lived authentically, without permission from anyone. Derek had said he had the right to date any woman and do anything he pleased. He'd been absolutely certain of his entitlement, his freedom, his power over the people around him. But rights without responsibility are just selfishness, and freedom without consideration for others is just cruelty. He'd exercised his perceived rights and discovered they came with prices he'd never anticipated: prison time, financial ruin, professional destruction, and the complete loss of everyone who'd once cared about him. I'd gained everything he'd lost. Not through manipulation or theft or betrayal, but through the hard work of facing truth, documenting reality, and building alliances with people who shared my commitment to justice and dignity. Margaret had shown me how to fight with integrity. Tom had shown me that trust could be rebuilt with wisdom. Patricia had shown me that the legal system, imperfect as it was, could still deliver accountability when backed by solid evidence and determined advocacy. And I had shown myself that I was stronger than I'd known, more capable than I'd believed, more resilient than anyone, including myself, had given me credit for. The apartment welcomed me with its familiar comfort, spaces I'd chosen and filled with things that made me happy. I made tea and settled into my favorite chair by the window, watching Portland's lights twinkle in the darkness. Somewhere out there, Derek was living with the consequences of his choices, probably still convinced he was the victim of circumstances rather than the architect of his own destruction. I didn't wish him well, but I didn't wish him harm either. I simply wished him irrelevant to my life, which he now was. The woman he'd tried to diminish and discard had survived, thrived, and moved forward into a future he'd never be part of. Margaret's words from her letter echoed in my mind: use it to become whoever you want to be, without anyone's permission. I was doing exactly that, every single day. Building a life that Derek could never diminish, because he no longer had any power over me. He'd lost that power the moment I shook Margaret's hand and chose alliance over acceptance, justice over peace, and my own truth over his comfortable lies. That was the real victory. Not his imprisonment or his poverty or his isolation, but my freedom. The freedom to define my own worth, to choose my own path, to build my own future without asking permission from anyone who didn't deserve to grant it. I raised my teacup in a silent toast to Margaret, wherever she was, hoping she could see what her final act of defiance had made possible. Then I opened my laptop and got back to work, living the life she'd helped me claim, honoring her memory by refusing to let anyone make me small ever again. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.